So we're here today for this vitally important conversation because the stakes of the 2020 election are so high and the threats are so dire. Despite, or maybe because of the vital importance of participation from underrepresented communities in the election, there has been an orchestrated campaign to curtail the right to vote. And this effort has targeted black voters and other communities of color, young and elderly voters, low-income voters, naturalized immigrants, disabled people, and others. It seems part of a clear strategy, along with restrictive immigration laws, to undo the gains for people of color that were won by struggle in the 1960s. These efforts amount to a strategy to prevent the new American majority, which is a growing share of the population, from realizing its potential power and entrenching white electoral power. In addition to these new challenges, there are the existing formidable challenges we face of low voter turnout in election. A quarter of eligible voters are unregistered, and only 50% of eligible voters typically turn up on election day. So what are unions, community groups, advocates, lawyers, and others doing to reduce barriers and increase engagement in 2020? What do we do in 2021 at the federal level to strengthen our democracy and protect the right to vote?
So by the time we get to the 13th Amendment, which abolished slavery except as punishment for a crime, the 13th Amendment abolished slavery except as punishment for a crime. And you'll see how the convict lease system is then triggered. And until World War II, we had people who were taken off the streets and they were put in prisons, worked to death. Recently, they found a mass grave in Texas, a mass grave, the remains of which are people who died as convicts worked to death in labor camps in Texas. So as we move forward and we see that we have not just the fight for the right to vote, but the ongoing backlash against that right to vote. We had all white primaries. Yes, only white people could vote in primaries at one time in this country. That case goes to the U.S. Supreme Court. We have literacy tests that began with the Irish Catholics to try to stop them from voting. So the test was based on a Protestant Bible, hoping that they would fail the test. They said, oh, this is a great test, these literacy tests. And I actually brought a copy of a literacy test if you ever want to know. It's like when you read this, one of the questions on a literacy test, bad government in a democracy is possible if the people, A, make wise votes, B, forget to vote, C, stay at home. And then you have these tests for people, and then you never know if you actually pass the test. By the time we get to the fact that they had to stop the poll tax, they had to stop the poll tax through a constitutional amendment, the 24th Amendment, to stop the poll tax. And now when we get to civil death, what is a civil death? Go back to the convict lease system, because states have the right to decide their qualifications to vote. That's why you can have in Indiana a voter ID requirement. In Texas, a voter ID. And these voter ID requirements, if they're not on their face, a race-based notion on their face, then they're considered face neutral as far as race goes, if it's race neutral. Here's the thing. They know what's going to stop a person from voting. They know if they put these provisions in place. They say you need an ID to vote, but we're going to shut down all the places that can give you an ID and increase the qualifications for what constitutes the necessary ID to get ID. And the civil death, on top of that, is that they decided the qualifications, one should be of good character. This was started in the 1800s. Be of good character. That means you can't have a felony conviction. That's why people with a felony conviction are not allowed to vote, because they have to be of good character. So from the time period of the 13th Amendment, where slavery was abolished except as punishment for a crime, then that criminal conviction has undermined the ability of millions of people to vote.
Congress gets taken back, and several states get taken in the midterm elections of 2010. In the taking of those elections, right, a rash of laws passed, right? one of them going after the right of unions, and another going after what? The right of people of color to participate in politics. A rash of voter ID laws and all kinds of stuff happened straight across. Importantly, from my point of view, in a place like Wisconsin, a voter ID law gets passed, and about 27,000 or so black Wisconsins, Milwaukee residents, lose their right to participate in the election. Everybody says there's a sudden drop in black participation. There wasn't no sudden drop, right? There wasn't no sudden drop from 2012 to 2016. There was a huge drop. It was an organized drop that folks went out and passed a whole bunch of laws that made it very unlikely that black Milwaukeeans would actually participate in that election cycle.